The garbled signal punched through the Kessler Dawn's passive array at 2:19 station relative, and Captain Maren Voss had her hand on the course correction toggle before the automated decoder finished its first pass. She had been running a solo freight haul through the outer Sethani corridor, 46 hours of empty transit between Bridger Depot and the refinery platforms at Callum's Reach. And the silence had been so total that the sudden burst of noise across the emergency band felt like a physical impact. The Kessler Dawn was a Corving-class light freighter, 62 meters stem to stern, crew complement of 1, carrying 1,800 tons of industrial sealant compound in modular canisters that filled her cargo spine from frame 12 to frame 48. She was not a rescue vessel. She was not a warship. She was a truck, and Maren Voss was the driver, and the signal screaming across her console had not been aimed at her. The decoder stripped what it could from the signal's outer layer. The primary beam was directional, aimed at a Telvari compact military relay designated Station Morath, roughly 120 light-years spinward. The encryption was Telvari military grade, which the Kessler Dawn civilian systems could not crack. But the structural signature underneath the cipher was unmistakable: cadence, repetition interval, frequency pattern, universal distress profile, Brannock Accord standard. Someone was in trouble, and they had called the Telvari compact for help. The reason Maren could hear it at all was a mechanical accident. The transmitter broadcasting the signal had suffered what the decoder flagged as a phase alignment failure. The directional emitter was drifting off-axis, sweeping its beam across a wider arc than intended, spraying signal energy into bands it was never supposed to touch. One of those bands was the Human Emergency Monitoring Frequency, mandated by Section 9 of the Sethani Corridor Transit Agreement. The Kessler Dawn's passive array had caught the spray. Maren pulled up the navigation plot. The signal originated from a system her chart listed as KR 7741, which was nothing she recognized. An unremarkable yellow dwarf with 4 rocky inner planets and a belt of metallic debris where a 5th planet might have been. The chart notation said TELVARI compact, Administrative Zone 14, no human traffic authorization. The system was 2 hours off her transit line at the Kessler Dawn's maximum sustainable speed. She checked the published Telvari response data in the corridor traffic database. Station Morath maintained a patrol wing for Administrative Zone 14. Standard response time for a Priority 1 distress signal, 14 to 19 hours, depending on patrol distribution. 14 hours minimum. The signal had been broadcasting for 11 minutes. Maren was not young. She was 53 years old, and she had been running freight since she was 26, first on her father's ore hauler in the Harkin Belt, then on a succession of larger vessels that she had gradually traded her way up through, one maintenance-deferred hull at a time, until she owned the Kessler Dawn outright. She had paid off the last installment 14 months ago. The ship was hers. The route was hers. The schedule was a contract she could break if she chose to, and the penalty would come out of a margin that was already thin enough that she weighed every decision in fuel expenditure and docking fees. She did not deliberate long. The signal was not addressed to her, not encrypted for her, not beamed at her species, and not her responsibility by any military or commercial obligation she held. But there was a Section 9 clause in the Corridor Transit Agreement, Article 19, Paragraph 3, Subclause D, that she had read once, years ago, during a licensing renewal seminar that most pilots slept through. It stated that any vessel intercepting a distress signal within practicable response range, regardless of the signal's intended recipient, was authorized to render assistance pending arrival of the designated responder. Authorized, not obligated. The clause had teeth only if someone chose to bite. Maren entered the course correction. The Kessler Dawn's drive spooled up with the familiar vibration that she felt through the deck plates in her boots, and the stars slid sideways in the viewport. 2 hours. She used the transit time to prepare. The Kessler Dawn was not equipped for search and rescue, but Marin had spent 27 years improvising with what she had, and what she had was 1,800 tons of industrial sealant compound, a hull repair kit rated for emergency patching, a portable atmosphere generator designed for maintaining cargo holds during transit, 2 EVA suits, one of which had a slow leak in the left knee seal that she'd been meaning to fix for 3 weeks, and a general-purpose cutting torch that she normally used for maintenance work on the cargo clamps. She also had in the Kessler Dawn's small arms locker a sidearm that she had never fired outside a range. She left it in the locker. Whatever was happening at KR 7741, she was arriving as help, not as a combatant. She ran through the EVA suit checks methodically. The primary suit, the one without the knee leak, was in working order. Full atmosphere charge, 4 hours of internal supply, boot magnets calibrated, headlamp tested. She loaded 70 kilograms of sealant compound into 2 backpack canisters that clipped into the suit's external harness frame. The harness was designed for cargo work, distributing load across the shoulders and hips so that a solo operator could carry materials into hard-to-reach sections of a ship's hull. It was heavy, but Marin had been carrying loads in EVA suits since she was a teenager hauling ore samples on her father's ship, and the weight settled across her frame like an old habit. She checked the cutting torch, charge at 89%, cutting head clear, safety lock functional. She checked the portable atmosphere generator, output rated at 16 cubic meters per hour of breathable air, enough to sustain approximately 20 people in a sealed compartment. She loaded it onto a small wheeled cart that she normally used for moving parts through the cargo bay and secured it near the forward airlock. Then she sat in the pilot's seat and watched the stars, and the transit timer counted down. The Kessler Dawn dropped out of transit 2 hours and 9 minutes after Marin changed course. What she found in the KR 7741 system made her sit very still in the pilot's seat for approximately 4 seconds, which was the longest pause she allowed herself before beginning her approach. The source of the distress signal was a Telvari orbital station designated Bastion Inurath, a military logistics hub built into the hollowed core of a captured metallic asteroid roughly 3 kilometers across. The station was supposed to be a fortress. Its asteroid shell provided natural radiation shielding and structural integrity that no fabricated hull could match. The Telvari had carved out the interior and built a multi-level facility spanning the full diameter of the rock, fleet resupply bays, crew rotation quarters, a regional command center, maintenance workshops, and the environmental systems needed to keep all of it alive. Bastion Inurath was dying. The Kessler Dawn sensors assembled the picture in layers as Marin closed the distance. A cascade failure in the station's primary power grid had triggered a structural collapse in the lower quarter of the hollowed asteroid. Seismic stress from the power surge had fractured load-bearing members that the Telvari engineers had carved into the asteroid's iron-nickel matrix, and those fractures had propagated through the rock in a chain reaction that sheared through 3 of the station's 4 main atmospheric containment bulkheads. The bulkheads were massive pressure doors, each one a slab of composite alloy 2 meters thick, and 3 of them had buckled under loads they were never designed to bear. The result was catastrophic atmospheric venting. Breathable air was bleeding through the compromised sections into the vacuum channels between the asteroid's carved interior and its outer shell. The remaining bulkhead, Bulkhead 1, according to the fragmented data the Kessler Dawn sensors were pulling from the station's external telemetry feed, was holding, but the pressure differential across its face was straining it beyond design tolerances. The station's population, which the telemetry estimated at 612 Telvari personnel, had retreated to the upper quarter behind Bulkhead 1 and was sealed in with whatever atmosphere remained. The distress signal was broadcasting from an automated emergency transmitter mounted on the station's exterior hull. The phase alignment failure Marin had detected was caused by debris from the collapse striking the transmitter's directional array. The dish was physically bent, its mounting bracket twisted, scattering the beam across a cone of frequencies that included bands the Telvari military would never intentionally touch. Marin opened a channel on the universal emergency frequency. She kept her voice level and clear, the voice of someone who had made 53 years' worth of decisions and was making one more. Bastion Enurath, this is the civilian freighter Kessler Dawn, Human Registry, responding to your distress transmission. I am 2 minutes from your position. Please state your current status. The response came in Telvari Standard, which the Kessler Dawn's translation system handled with serviceable accuracy. The voice was male, clipped with the consonant-heavy cadence of formal Telvari diction, and controlled in a way that told Marin the speaker was operating on discipline rather than calm. Kessler Dawn, this is Bastion Commander Ethan Solverk. We did not transmit to you. Our distress signal is directed at Station Morath. Repeat, we did not request human assistance. Understood, Commander. Your transmitter has a phase alignment fault. The directional dish is damaged. The beam is spraying across multiple bands, including the human emergency monitoring frequency for this corridor. I intercepted the spray. I'm here because I heard you, not because you called me. A pause. Marin counted 3 seconds of silence during which she imagined a Telvari military officer, processing the fact that his encrypted military distress signal had leaked onto a human commercial frequency, because a piece of debris had bent an antenna. Kessler Dawn, our situation is critical. We have 612 personnel consolidated behind our last functional atmospheric bulkhead. That bulkhead is rated for 400 hours of pressure differential at current loading, but our atmospheric recyclers are operating at 31% capacity due to primary power loss. We have breathable air for approximately 9 hours at current consumption rates. Station Morath's estimated response time is 14 to 19 hours. Marin did the arithmetic. 9 hours of air. 14 hours until the Telvari patrol arrived at the earliest. A gap of 5 hours minimum, 5 hours during which 612 people would be breathing atmosphere that was thinning towards suffocation. Commander Solverk, I carry a portable atmosphere generator rated for cargo hold pressurization, 16 cubic meters per hour of breathable air. It won't replace your recyclers, but it can supplement your supply and extend your margin. I also have 1,800 tons of industrial sealant compound in my cargo hold. If your structural damage is causing atmosphere loss through hull fractures in the asteroid shell, I may be able to seal them. Another pause. This one lasted 5 full seconds, long enough that Marin heard, faintly through the channel, what sounded like a second voice in the background, saying something in rapid Telvari that her translator couldn't catch at that volume. Kessler Dawn, you are a civilian freighter. Your crew complement. One person. One person. Solverk repeated the phrase as if testing whether it meant the same thing when spoken twice. The structural damage causing our atmospheric bleed is in the lower quarter, below the collapse zone. Access requires traversing approximately 800 meters of compromised corridor through areas with partial atmospheric loss, unstable structural members, active debris fall, and gravity plating failure. The fractures causing the atmosphere bleed are in the outer asteroid shell itself, the rock, in sections that have lost environmental control entirely. What's the gravity situation in the lower quarter? Our damage control teams attempted to reach the fractures 4 hours ago. 11 personnel entered the lower quarter. 3 returned. The corridors are impassable for our teams because the collapse destabilized the gravity plating. In some sections, the plating is cycling randomly between standard gravity and approximately 4 times standard. The cycle times are irregular, 3 to 40 seconds between shifts. In other sections, the plating has failed entirely. leaving zero gravity with active debris fields of metallic fragments from the asteroid shell. The cycling plates injured 8 of our damage control team members. Several were pinned under structural debris when the gravity spiked without warning. Marin looked at the EVA suit locker. She thought about the slow leak in the spare suit's left knee seal. She thought about the cutting torch, which weighed 9 kilograms and was designed for stationary hull work, not for carrying through 800 meters of collapsing corridor in random gravity. She thought about the mathematics of the situation. One woman, one truck, one set of tools designed for patching cargo ships, against an asteroid station that was actively trying to kill anyone who entered its lower levels. Commander, what's the composition of your outer shell? The asteroid itself, what's the substrate? Iron-nickel matrix with silicate inclusions, standard metallic class captured body. Why? Because my sealant compound is formulated for iron-nickel substrate bonding. It's what the construction crews use to patch hull breaches on ore processing platforms in the Harken Belt. I grew up applying it. My father ran an ore hauler, and every season we'd spend 3 weeks patching platforms that were older than the Brannick Accords. I've sealed iron-nickel substrate fractures in environments that were worse than what you're describing. If I can reach the fractures, I can seal them, and your atmosphere bleed stops. Captain Voss, the lower quarter killed 8 of my people in the last 4 hours. 8 of my trained military personnel. You are proposing to enter it alone. I'm proposing to enter it with the right material, the right tools, and the right experience. Your people went in without the compound and without experience in variable gravity. I've worked in unstable grav environments since I was 14 years old. My father's platforms in the Harken Belt had gravity plating that was decades past replacement. The grav field cycled without warning, spiked to 3 or 4 times standard when the capacitors discharged, and dropped to 0 when the power dipped. Every miner in the belt learned to move in that environment, or they didn't last a season. It's not a skill the Telvari military trains for. It's a skill humans learn in mining belts where the equipment is old, and the gravity plating fails on Tuesdays. The pause this time was not communication delay. It was Commander Ethan Solverk processing the fact that the only vessel within a 14-hour radius was a human cargo truck. The only person aboard was a 53-year-old freight pilot, and the only viable plan to save his station was to send that pilot into a section that had already crippled 11 of his trained personnel. Kessler Dawn, I am formally requesting your assistance under Article 19, Paragraph 3, Subclause D, of the Sethani Corridor Transit Agreement. Acknowledged, Commander. Beginning docking approach now. Marin brought the Kessler Dawn alongside Bastion Inureth's upper docking collar, one of 3 external docking ports, 2 of which were buried under collapsed debris. The surviving port was designed for Telvari patrol corvettes, and the collar geometry didn't match the Kessler Dawn's docking interface. The Telvari port was wider, taller, and shaped for a hull profile that bore no resemblance to a Corving-class freighter. Marin solved the problem with the cargo loading arm, a hydraulic boom normally used to transfer modular canisters from the ship's cargo spine to station receiving bays. She extended the arm from its housing behind the forward airlock, locked it against the station's emergency ingress hatch, and pressurized the gap between the arm's collar seal and the hatch frame with emergency sealant from the hull repair kit. The result was a bridge between the ship and the station, a metal beam 40 centimeters wide, with a pressurized seal at the station end and an open frame walkway in between, exposed to vacuum on both sides, spanning a gap of 12 meters. She crossed it in the primary EVA suit carrying the 70 kilograms of sealant compound on her back, the cutting torch clipped to her hip, the headlamp throwing a cone of white light into the darkness of Bastion Inureth's emergency airlock. She had also jury-rigged the portable atmosphere generator onto a tether line behind her. The unit trailed through the bridge crossing on a friction pad sled, bumping gently against the cargo arm's surface. The emergency airlock cycled, and the inner door opened. Commander Solverk met her on the other side with 4 of his officers. The Telvari were tall, roughly 2.5 meters, with dense, slate-colored skin that carried a faint pattern of darker striations, like geological strata compressed into living tissue. Their eyes were large, pale amber, set deep under heavy brow ridges that gave their faces a permanent quality of guarded assessment. They wore military uniforms in a shade of dark teal that Marin's headlamp turned almost black. Solverk looked at her. She looked up at him. He was taller than her by a full meter, broader by half again, and his face carried the expression of someone whose understanding of the situation had just been revised in a direction he had not anticipated and could not reverse. "You are smaller than I expected," he said. "I get that a lot," Marin said. "The atmosphere generator is behind me on the tether. Get your engineers to set it up in whatever compartment has the most people. It'll buy you air while I'm working below. Now, where's the access point to the lower quarter?" Solverk assigned 2 officers to retrieve the atmosphere generator, while he led Marin through the upper levels of Bastion and Urath. The station's surviving quarter was a study in compression. 612 personnel crammed into space, designed for 150. Telvari were everywhere, seated against corridor walls with their long legs drawn up, standing in doorways with the careful stillness of people conserving oxygen, lying on improvised bedding in storage bays that had been emptied of their original contents and filled with bodies instead. Medical teams worked in a converted mess hall where the overhead lighting flickered on a staggered rhythm, because the backup power grid was rationing output to extend its own life. The air smelled thin and carried a chemical bite that Marin recognized instantly: recycler strain. The distinctive metallic tang of carbon dioxide scrubbers running too hot and too long, failing to fully process the metabolic load of 600 people breathing in a space meant for a quarter of that number. Children. She saw Telvari children, younger individuals with the lighter skin striations that she was learning to read as juvenile, pressed against adults in the corners of converted storage bays. She had not expected children on a military logistics station, and the sight of them tightened something behind her ribs that she did not examine too closely, because examining it would cost time she didn't have. The access point to the lower quarter was a reinforced blast door at the base of a service stairwell. The door was sealed, its status panel showing red across every indicator. Beyond it, according to the station's remaining internal sensors, the atmosphere was present but degrading roughly 68% of standard pressure, and falling steadily as the shell fractures continued to bleed air into the vacuum between the asteroid's interior and its outer surface. "The fractures are approximately 800 meters below this point," Solverk said. "Through the logistics bay, a large staging area for cargo operations, then the secondary power junction, and the lower maintenance corridor that leads to the outer shell access passage. The gravity plating in those sections is cycling unpredictably. My damage control teams reported gravitational fluctuations between 0.2 and 4.1, standard in the logistics bay, with cycle times between 3 and 40 seconds. The power junction has lost gravity entirely, pure zero grav with a metallic debris field from shell fragments. The maintenance corridor has intermittent gravity at approximately half standard, with periodic spikes." "How many of your people are still down there?" Solverk's jaw tightened. The striations across his cheekbones darkened, a physiological response that Marin filed for later interpretation. 8. 3 of the damage control team who were injured by gravity spikes and could not be extracted, 2 with broken limbs, 1 with a spinal compression injury. They are in the maintenance corridor. 5 maintenance personnel who were in the lower quarter performing routine work when the cascade failure occurred. They sealed themselves in a utility room near the secondary power junction approximately 12 hours ago. They have independent atmosphere from the room's emergency supply. Estimated remaining duration, 3 hours. 13 lives below, 612 above, and somewhere in the gap between those numbers, 7 fractures in an asteroid shell that were draining the air from all of them. "I'm going," Marin said. She adjusted the sealant canisters on her back, settling the 70-kilogram load across her hips. "When I reach the fractures, I'll need your engineering team to guide me remotely. I know sealant application on iron-nickel substrate, but I don't know your station's structural layout, and I need to know which fractures are bleeding the most atmosphere so I can prioritize." Senior Engineer Vethal will be on the comm channel. She designed the lower quarter's environmental integration with the asteroid shell. She will guide you. "Good. One more thing, I need a path to the sealed utility room, the 5 maintenance personnel, and the 3 injured damage control members in the corridor. I'll extract them on the way back up." Salvik looked at her for a long moment. The amber eyes didn't blink. Marin wasn't sure Telvari blinked the same way humans did, but something shifted behind them. "That is 8 additional personnel to move through 800 meters of compromised corridor in variable gravity. You are one person, Captain." "I'm one person who knows how to move in bad gravity. Your people don't. Get me down there and I'll figure out the rest. That's the deal." He opened the blast door. The lower quarter of Bastion and Nurath was a different world. Marin's headlamp swept across a corridor that had been straight and functional 12 hours ago, and was now a twisted geometry of buckled wall panels, sheared support beams, and floating debris. The gravity plating beneath her boots hummed erratically. She felt the pull shift from standard to half-standard to nothing in the span of 3 steps, and then slam back to nearly 3 times standard with a force that dropped her to one knee and compressed the sealant canisters against her spine hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. She rode it. She had learned gravity variable movement in the Harkin belt when she was 14, hauling ore cans through mining tunnels where the plating was 40 years past its replacement date and failed without warning. The technique was simple in theory, brutal in practice. Stay low, keep your center of gravity directly over your feet, never extend a limb you can't retract fast, and when the gravity spikes, go limp and let your joints absorb the impact rather than fighting it with locked muscles. Fighting it broke bones. Yielding to it left bruises. The difference between the two was the difference between walking out and being carried. The logistics bay was the worst section. It was a cavernous space, 80 meters long, 30 meters wide, with a ceiling that vaulted upward into darkness where the headlamp couldn't reach. Originally used for staging cargo transfers between arriving ships and the station's internal storage bays, it was now a killing field of random gravity. The plating here was cycling in waves, a ripple pattern that moved across the floor like a visible tide, lifting debris into the air at the zero-grav crest and slamming it down at the high-grav trough. Cargo containers that had broken loose from their deck clamps tumbled in slow arcs during the crests, then crashed to the deck during the troughs with impacts that sent shudders through the structural members and shook loose new fragments from the compromised ceiling. Marin stopped at the bay's entrance and timed the wave pattern. She counted for 3 full cycles, building the rhythm in her head. 12 seconds crest to crest, roughly 4 seconds of near-zero gravity at the peak. That was the movement window. 3 seconds of standard gravity on the back slope, stable footing but closing fast, and 5 seconds of elevated gravity, approximately 3.5 standard in the trough. The trough was the killer. 3.5 standard meant her own body weight tripled. The 70 kilograms of sealant on her back became 210. Every loose piece of debris in the bay became a falling hammer. A cargo container that weighed 3 tons at standard gravity weighed 10.5 tons in the trough. She entered the bay at the beginning of a crest. The zero-grav phase lifted her boots off the deck, and she pushed off a wall strut, angling across the bay in a controlled drift toward the far side. She covered 15 meters before the gravity returned on the back slope, and she caught a structural rib, a vertical support beam welded to the deck, and locked her arms around it as the trough hit. The weight slammed down. Her boots hit the deck. The sealant canisters drove into her back. She gritted her teeth and held the rib while around her. Debris that had been floating at head height dropped like stones, pinging off the deck plates and bouncing in patterns that would have been beautiful if they hadn't been lethal. The trough passed. The next crest began. She pushed off again, another 15 meters, another structural rib, another crushing trough. A cargo container the size of a ground vehicle tumbled past her during the third cycle. It rolled through the air in the zero-grav crest, slow and almost graceful, and then hit the deck in the trough 2 meters from her position with an impact that cracked the plating beneath it, and sent a vibration through the rib she was holding that she felt in her teeth. If it had been 2 meters closer, if the trajectory had differed by the width of the container's own shadow, it would have crushed her against the rib, and that would have been the end of Article 19, Paragraph 3, Subclause D. She crossed the logistics bay in 6 cycles, 72 seconds of precise timing in gravity that wanted to kill her. When she reached the far side and pulled herself through the exit hatch into the corridor beyond, she allowed herself 3 breaths that she counted and controlled before moving on. The secondary power junction was quieter but more dangerous in a different way. The gravity here had failed entirely, pure zero-grav, and the structural collapse had released a cloud of metallic debris that drifted through the corridor like slow-motion shrapnel. Iron-nickel fragments from the asteroid shell, ranging from dust-sized particles that caught the headlamp beam like glitter to chunks the mass of her fist that tumbled end over end, with enough momentum to puncture an EVA suit if they hit at the right angle. Her suit's outer layer was rated for micrometeorite impact up to a certain velocity threshold, but the larger fragments exceeded that threshold if they were moving fast enough, and some of them were. She navigated by pushing off walls and ceiling, using the cutting torch handle as a contact point to redirect her trajectory when debris forced course changes. The headlamp cut through the dark in a single beam, illuminating fragments that sparkled and tumbled in the zero-grav silence. The only sound was her own breathing inside the helmet, and the faint, occasional tick of small particles striking her suit's outer shell. Senior Engineer Vethal's voice came through the comm link, calm, precise, and accented in a way that Marin found unexpectedly grounding, like a navigation beacon in an unfamiliar corridor. Captain Voss, the primary fracture site is 200 meters ahead, in the outer shell access passage. There are 7 fractures ranging from 8 centimeters to approximately 1.4 meters in length. The fractures follow the stress lines in the asteroid's iron-nickel matrix. They are propagation cracks from the original structural failure. The largest fracture is responsible for approximately 60% of the atmospheric bleed. If you seal that one first, you extend the upper quarter's air supply by 3 hours. Copy. What's the substrate condition around the fractures? Any oxidation, any contamination that would interfere with the bond. Iron-nickel with moderate oxidation from atmospheric exposure over the station's 14-year operational period. The fracture surfaces themselves are fresh, clean stress breaks with minimal contamination. The edges are smooth, not jagged. Your sealant should bond well to the exposed substrate. It will. I've sealed worse on platforms that were older than your compact's current government. She reached the outer shell access passage. It was a narrow corridor carved directly into the asteroid's interior, not the finished, paneled corridors of the upper levels, but raw rock with a thin layer of environmental coating over the iron-nickel surface. The fractures were visible as thin lines of cold light cutting through the rock, cracks in the asteroid's shell, where the interior atmosphere was bleeding out into the vacuum beyond. Through the largest fracture, 1.4 meters long and roughly 2 centimeters wide, she could see stars. The Sethani Corridor's nebula was visible as a faint amber smear through the crack, and the temperature differential between the station's interior and the void beyond created a whisper of moving air across the fracture that she felt as a faint tug on her suit. The atmosphere here was dangerously thin. Her suit's external sensors read 41% of standard pressure, and falling measurably in the time it took her to unsling the first canister of sealant compound. She kept her helmet sealed and worked off the suit's internal atmosphere supply. The compound was a two-part epoxy metallic adhesive designed for emergency hull repair on iron-nickel substrates. When mixed and applied to a clean surface, the compound reacted with the iron-nickel matrix at the molecular level, forming a bond that was structurally stronger than the original material. The application was not delicate work. It was industrial, physical, and required steady hands and consistent pressure. The injector was a manual tool, a pistol grip dispenser that pushed the mixed compound through a flat nozzle in a ribbon of viscous gray paste. Marin had used injectors like this since she was a teenager, and the motion was in her hands the way a pilot's hands know the flight controls, without conscious thought, guided by decades of repetition. The zero-gravity environment complicated the application. The sealant was a viscous paste, but in microgravity it wanted to float away from the substrate instead of settling into the crack. Marin anchored herself to a structural rib with her boot magnets, pressed the injector nozzle into the fracture's edge, and applied the compound in a continuous ribbon, using the flat of her gloved hand to press the paste into the gap and hold it against the iron-nickel surface until the initial chemical bond set, approximately 90 seconds per 20-centimeter section. The first fracture, the largest one, took 23 minutes to seal. 7 sections, each one pressed into place and held while the compound reacted, while the air whispered through the diminishing gap, while the stars visible through the crack narrowed and then disappeared as the sealant filled the last centimeter of the breach. When the final section bonded and the line of cold light vanished, Vethal's voice came through the comm with a quality that Marin's translator rendered as carefully factual, but that carried, underneath the data, something warmer. Atmospheric bleed reduced by 61%. Pressure stabilization detected across the upper quarter. Estimated air supply at current consumption rate extended to 12 hours. You have bought us time, Captain. 5 more hours of margin over the patrol's ETA. Not comfortable but livable. Moving to fracture 2. 6 more fractures. Marin moved to the next. She had sealed 4 of the 7 fractures and was working on the 5th, a hairline crack 40 centimeters long near the junction of 2 structural ribs, when the station shifted. The aftershock came from below, a secondary collapse in a section of the asteroid's infrastructure that the first failure had weakened, and 12 hours of stress had finally broken. The tremor propagated upward through the station's structural members in a wave that she felt through her boot magnets before she heard it, a deep, grinding vibration that traveled through the rock at the speed of sound in iron-nickel. In the outer shell access passage, the tremor expressed itself as a sudden, violent displacement of the rock face. A slab of iron-nickel matrix, the size of a cargo pallet, separated from the corridor wall at the junction point she was working on and slid across the space with a grinding roar that the thin atmosphere carried as a bass rumble. Marin saw it coming. She pushed off the rib she was anchored to, but the slab caught the cargo loading frame of her sealant canisters, the external harness that held the 2 backpack canisters to her suit, and pinned it against the opposite wall. The impact drove the air from her lungs despite the suit's cushioning layer. Her vision whited out for a half-second, and when it cleared, the slab had settled against the wall, wedging itself into a gap between 2 structural ribs, and the canister harness was trapped beneath it. Marin was pinned, not crushed. The slab hadn't hit her body directly. It had caught the harness frame, which had absorbed the impact. But the harness connecting her suit to the sealant canisters was caught between the slab's lower edge and the wall, and the slab weighed approximately 3 tons in the passage's residual gravitational field, which had resumed at roughly 0.8 standard following the aftershock, enough to hold the slab in place with a force that Marin could not overcome alone. She tried to release the harness. The quick-release buckles on the shoulder straps were designed for emergency jettison. Pull the red tab and the straps separate. But the slab's impact had deformed the left buckle's housing. The metal was bent inward, jamming the release mechanism. She pulled the tab. It didn't move. She braced her right hand against the wall and pulled harder. The tab bent but didn't release. The mechanism was jammed by the deformed housing, and no amount of force she could apply one-handed from this angle would free it. She could not unfasten the harness, and she could not move the slab. She was anchored to the wall by 3 tons of asteroid. Commander Solverk, this is Voss. I've had a structural shift in the outer shell passage. I'm pinned by a displaced rock slab. My harness is caught between the slab and the wall. I cannot self-extract. The slab is approximately 3 metric tons. I need assistance. The comm channel was silent for 5 seconds. When Solverk's voice came back, it was very controlled, the kind of control that costs effort. Captain Voss, describe your condition in full. I'm not injured. My suit is intact. Atmosphere supply is at 62%, roughly 2.5 hours remaining. But I'm immobilized. I can't reach the remaining 3 fractures from this position, and I can't move back toward the upper quarter. Understood. I will assemble a team and... Commander, your teams can't navigate the gravity zones. That's why I'm down here instead of them. Sending another team into the lower quarter risks losing more people. You know that. Silence. The weight of it came through the channel clearly enough that Marin could almost feel Solverk processing the circularity of the situation. The person he'd sent to save his station now needed saving, and the reason she'd been sent was that his own people couldn't survive the route. I am aware of that fact, Captain. Then you're aware that I have a different proposal. I'm listening. The 5 maintenance personnel in the sealed utility room near the power junction. They've been in the lower quarter for 12 hours. They've been watching the gravity patterns through the room's internal sensors and listening to the structural shifts. They know the timing of the cycles in the sections between their room and my position better than anyone on this station, because they've been living inside them for half a day. Get me a comm link to them. Vethal's voice cut in from the engineering channel. I can route a direct link through the utility room's independent comm node. The node is functioning. I've been monitoring their life signs through it. Connecting now. The connection was established in 30 seconds. The signal was fuzzy but audible, degraded by the structural interference between the upper quarter and the utility room. A voice came through, younger than Solverk's, tighter in pitch, carrying the specific tension of someone who had been contained in a small room for 12 hours and was controlling fear through discipline rather than calm. This is Maintenance Specialist Dithari Nuvan. Who is this? Specialist Nuvan, my name is Captain Marin Voss. I'm the pilot of the human freighter Kessler Dawn. I came to seal the fractures in your station's outer shell that are bleeding your atmosphere. I've sealed 4 of 7. A rock slab has pinned me to the wall in the outer shell access passage. I need your help to get free. A pause. Marin could hear breathing more than one person. The 5 maintenance specialists listening. You are human, Nuvan said. You came here to help us. Yes. And now you are trapped. Yes, and you are the only people on this station who can reach me, because you understand the gravity patterns in the lower quarter. We have been in this room for 12 hours, Captain. We have watched through the sensors as the gravity plates destroyed 3 of our colleagues who attempted to cross the logistics bay. We have listened to their emergency transmissions. We have heard the sounds. We are not gravity variable specialists. We are maintenance workers. No, but you've been observing the patterns for 12 hours. You know the wave timing in the logistics bay, the 12-second cycle, the 4-second crest, the 5-second trough. You know the debris drift patterns in the power junction. You know the intermittent spike timing in the maintenance corridor. You know all of this because you've been living inside it, monitoring it, counting it, because that's what maintenance workers do. They observe systems. You know more about the gravity behavior in these sections than anyone on the station, including Commander Solverk. Silence, then Nuvan's voice quieter. What do you need us to do? Marin talked them through it. She described the movement technique for the variable gravity zones: stay low, move during the crests, anchor during the troughs, never fight the gravity spike, let the body yield and absorb rather than resist. She described the debris field in the power junction, the trajectory patterns, the velocity of the larger fragments, the safe approach vectors that minimized exposure. She described the route from the utility room to her position, 400 meters through the power junction, and down the maintenance corridor to the outer shell access passage. The slab pinning me can be moved by 3 or 4 people working together, she said. It's not structural, it's loose debris from the aftershock. Free me, and I'll seal the last 3 fractures. Then I'll lead all of you, your team plus the 3 injured damage control members in the maintenance corridor, back through the lower quarter to the upper levels. I know the route. I've traveled it. I know the gravity timing. Why would you do this? Nuvan asked. The question was not rhetorical, it was genuine. You are not Telvari, you were not called. You are a civilian freight pilot operating outside your authorized transit corridor. This is not your station, not your people, not your obligation. Specialist, it stopped being about obligation when I changed course 2 hours ago. Right now I'm pinned to a wall in your station, which makes it very much my problem. And your 3 hours of utility room atmosphere are down to about 2. So we can discuss the philosophical dimensions of mutual aid, or we can start moving. She heard a sound on the channel, a word in Telvari spoken by a second voice, that her translator rendered as an approximation of sufficient or possibly understood. Then Nuvan's voice, steadier now. We are moving, described the first gravity transition. It took the maintenance team 47 minutes to reach her. 47 minutes of Marin on the comm channel, her back against a wall, 3 tons of rock holding her in place, talking 5 Telvari who had never trained for variable gravity through the most dangerous traverse of their lives. She called the gravity cycles as Nuvan relayed them through the team: crest, move, trough, hold. And she heard the controlled breathing of people doing something they had been told was impossible, because the only alternative was dying in a utility room. She heard Nuvan call out the wave timing in the power junction with a precision that told her he had been counting those cycles for 12 hours, building a mental model of the pattern, waiting for a reason to use it. She heard a specialist named Rithin misjudge a trough transition in the maintenance corridor and get slammed to the deck at 3.5 standard, heard the grunt of impact, the 3 seconds of silence that could have meant anything, and then Rithin's voice, winded but intact. I am functional. Bruised. Continuing. They arrived at the outer shell passage in a ragged line, 5 Telvari in maintenance coveralls smeared with metallic dust, their faces carrying the specific expression of people who have just accomplished something they did not believe they could do and have not yet decided how to feel about it. Nuvan was first through the hatch. He was younger than Marin had expected from his voice. The lighter striations across his cheekbones that she now recognized as a juvenile marker were still visible, though fading. He was perhaps the Telvari equivalent of 30. He looked at the slab. He looked at Marin, pinned to the wall by her harness, the headlamp throwing light across his face from below. That is a large rock, he said. It is. And you are a small human. Heard that before today, specialist. Nuvan organized his team without wasted words. 4 of them positioned themselves around the slab's accessible edges, 2 on the left, 2 on the right, while the 5th, Rithin, braced against the opposite wall for leverage. Telvari were larger and significantly stronger than humans. Their dense musculature and heavy skeletal structure were evolved for a homeworld with gravity approximately 20% higher than Earth standard. And 4 Telvari working in coordination, could move mass that Marin could not have budged alone if she'd had a week and a lever. They heaved. The slab shifted, grinding against the structural ribs with a sound like a ship's hull scraping a dock. Marin felt the pressure on her harness release by degrees, first the left shoulder strap, then the right, then the waist anchor. The deformed buckle still refused to release. The jammed mechanism was bent beyond manual recovery. So Marin unclipped the cutting torch from her hip and applied one precise pulse of heat that severed the jammed buckle housing and freed the harness strap from the slab's grip. She stumbled forward, caught her balance against the passage wall, and took 3 deep breaths that her suit's recycler processed into clean air. "Thank you, Specialist." "You came here for us," Nuvan said. "We came here for you. The sequence is circular." Marin checked the sealant canisters. One was crushed. The slab had deformed its housing beyond any possibility of use, and the compound inside had been contaminated by the housing's fractured polymer lining. The other canister was intact, with approximately 40% of its compound remaining. She did the calculation. 3 fractures left, the largest of which Vethal had described as approximately 60 centimeters. 40% of one canister would be enough, barely, if she was precise with the application and didn't waste a single gram of compound on edges that didn't need it. She went back to work. The remaining fractures took 38 minutes. Each one required the same process: anchor, apply, press, hold, wait for the bond, but she moved faster now because the compound was limited and the clock was real. When the 7th and final fracture sealed and the last line of starlight disappeared behind a ridge of gray sealant, Vethal's voice came through the comm with a single word that the translator offered as complete, and that Marin suspected, in its original Telvari, carried considerably more freight than that. "Atmospheric bleed from the outer shell has ceased entirely, Captain. All 7 fractures sealed. Current air supply in the upper quarter at present consumption rate, 26 hours. 26 hours. Station Moreth's patrol wing would arrive in approximately 11. The margin was 15 hours more than enough, barring another major structural failure. The return trip was the hardest part. Marin collected the 3 injured damage control team members from the maintenance corridor, 2 with broken limbs from gravity spikes, 1 with a spinal compression injury that required immobilization. Nuvan's team had already located them during their traverse and marked their positions. The maintenance specialists improvised stretchers from wall panels that they cut free using Marin's torch, and the group began the 800-meter return through the lower quarter. 11 people now. 5 maintenance specialists carrying 3 immobilized casualties, plus Nuvan and Rithin flanking the stretchers, plus Marin at the front, calling gravity cycles in a voice that never rose above conversational volume. Creston 3, move now, 12 meters to the next anchor rib. Trough in 7 seconds, get low and hold. Don't fight the weight. Let it push you down and hold the rib. It passes in 5 seconds. They crossed the logistics bay in 22 minutes, 6 gravity cycles, with the stretcher bearers timing their movements to the crests and anchoring the casualties during the troughs. The power junction took 9 minutes in 0 grav, with Marin leading the way through the debris field and calling out the trajectory of the larger fragments so the stretcher teams could adjust their drift angles. The lower maintenance corridor took 14 minutes, with Rithin calling the intermittent gravity spikes 3 seconds before they hit, because he had been counting their timing during the outbound traverse and had the pattern locked in his head. When Marin cycled the blast door at the top of the service stairwell and the upper quarters atmosphere, thin, recycler strained, but present, washed over the group, the corridor beyond was lined with Telvari personnel. 612 people who had been listening on the open comm channel for the past 3 hours, who had heard every gravity call, every instruction, every comm correction when a stretcher bearer mistimed a trough, who had heard Marin talk 5 maintenance specialists through a gravity field that had broken trained soldiers, and who had heard those specialists do it, not because they were trained for it, but because someone who was pinned to a wall had told them they could. Commander Solverk was standing at the front of the corridor. He looked at Marin. He looked at the 11 survivors behind her, 8 Telvari who had been trapped in the lower quarter for 12 hours, brought out by 5 of their own colleagues guided by a human voice. He looked at the spent sealant canister still on Marin's back, the cutting torch clipped to her hip, the metallic dust on her suit, the slow drip from the left knee seal where the chill of near vacuum had finally degraded the gasket past its tolerance. "Senior Engineer Vethal," he said, without taking his eyes from Marin. "Final atmospheric status." "All 7 fractures sealed, Commander. Atmosphere bleed from the outer shell has ceased. Upper quarter air supply at current consumption rate, 26 hours. Station Morath's patrol wing estimated arrival, 11 hours. Margin 15 hours. Solverk was quiet for a moment. The corridor was quiet. 612 Telvari, breathing air that existed because of hull paste and a mining belt education, stood in silence and watched a human freight pilot who was a full meter shorter than any of them lean against the blast door frame, because she had been on her feet for 11 hours and the adrenaline was finally burning out. "Captain Voss," Solverk said, "our distress signal was directed at Station Morath, at the Telvari Compact's military response infrastructure. It was transmitted on an encrypted military frequency designated for Compact fleet assets. You are a civilian freight pilot operating a cargo vessel with no rescue capability, no military mandate, and no authorization to be present in Telvari Administrative Zone 14. Your transmitter was broken, Commander. The dish was bent. The beam sprayed. I caught the spray. Article 19, Paragraph 3, Subclause D, you invoked it yourself." "I know the clause, Captain. It authorizes voluntary response. It does not explain why you chose to respond." Marin looked at him. She was tired. Her shoulders ached from the sealant harness. Her left knee throbbed where the suit leak had let vacuum chill seep against the joint lining. She had sealant compound caked on her gloves and iron nickel dust in the creases of her suit and the taste of recycled air in her throat. "Commander, I've been hauling freight through empty corridors for 27 years. Every corridor I've ever flown through, every system I've ever transited, someone built a station or a relay or a beacon so that if something went wrong, a signal could go out. The whole infrastructure assumes that someone will answer, not someone specific, not the right someone with the right credentials and the right authorization, just someone." She paused. "Your signal went to the wrong someone, but it went, and I was there. And the infrastructure worked the way it was supposed to work. Maybe not the way your engineers designed it, but the way it actually works when the equipment breaks and the beam sprays and the only ship in range is a truck carrying sealant." Solverk inclined his head, a slow, deliberate gesture that Marin could not fully parse but whose weight was unmistakable. "Captain Voss, our formal record will reflect that a human civilian responded to a Telvari military distress signal that was not directed at any human vessel, entity, or installation. That this response was voluntary, rendered under Article 19 of the Sethani Corridor Transit Agreement. That the respondent entered a structurally compromised zone that had incapacitated 11 Telvari military personnel, sealed 7 atmospheric fractures in the station's outer shell, and extracted 8 trapped personnel with the assistance of 5 station maintenance specialists, and that the respondent was one person, operating alone, from a cargo freighter." "That's accurate." "I will also note," Solverk said, "that this response was initiated because of a mechanical defect in our distress transmitter. We did not aim our signal at you. We did not know you were there. We did not believe any human vessel operated in this sector of the corridor." "You didn't. The Kessler Dawn was 2 hours off a freight route that doesn't pass through your administrative zone. I was in range because your antenna was bent, and the spray happened to reach the frequency I was required to monitor. The margins on things like that are narrow, Commander. They work out or they don't. 11 hours later, the Telvari patrol wing from Station Morath arrived, 4 corvettes and a fleet tender, and found Bastion Inurath stable, its population intact, and a Corving-class human freighter docked at the upper collar via a cargo boom that had no business serving as a docking bridge, but had done so for 14 hours without complaint. The patrol wing's commanding officer, Senior Captain Marineth Volis, hailed Marin directly after reviewing Solverk's filed report. Captain Voss, the compact will file a formal acknowledgement with the Sethani Corridor Transit Authority. Your response will be registered under Article 19. Additionally, the compact will compensate you for the sealant compound expended during your repair work at market rate plus a service premium. Appreciated, Captain. I also have a delivery to make at Callum's Reach that I'm now 14 hours late on. My client is going to file a complaint with the Shipping Guild. The compact will ensure your guild is informed of the circumstances. I expect the delivery penalty will be waived. Also appreciated. One more thing, my left EVA suit has a slow leak in the knee seal. Your fleet tender wouldn't happen to carry compatible sealant tape. A pause on the channel, a pause that Marin's translator rendered as neutral, but that she suspected, in its original Telvari cadence, carried something closer to bewilderment. We will provide the sealant tape, Captain Voss. Thank you, Kessler Dawn out. Marin undocked from Bastion Inurath, retracted the cargo loading arm, and set course for Callum's Reach. The Kessler Dawn's transit drive spooled up, and the asteroid station, stable, sealed, breathing, dwindled to a point of reflected light against the dark of the Sethani corridor. 14 hours late, 1 roll of sealant tape richer. 612 lives that would not appear on her Shipping Guild reliability rating, because the Guild's metrics did not have a field for that. The Sethani corridor was empty and quiet, the way it always was. Marin Voss flew through it alone, the way she always did, and somewhere behind her a formal record was being filed that described a mechanical defect, a broken antenna, a misrouted signal, and a response that the Telvari Compact's protocols had not anticipated. Because the protocols assumed that the right people would answer the right signal on the right frequency, and what had actually happened was that a bent dish had sprayed a beam into a band it was never supposed to reach. And the only person listening had been a freight pilot who understood that the infrastructure works when someone decides it does. Not the right someone, just someone. The stars were steady ahead, and the drive hummed, and Marin Voss flew on toward Callum's Reach with a hold full of sealant compound minus what she'd left on an asteroid, a knee that ached from vacuum chill, and the knowledge that 612 people were breathing tonight because a transmitter had broken in exactly the right way.